New Zealand's RBA is holding its May cash rate decision today, and it's expected to rise sharply or increase rates sharply. Joining me now is our business reporter, Edward Boyd. I should say the New Zealand Reserve Bank, not the Reserve Bank of Australia. Ed, the cash rate in New Zealand is likely to jump to 2%. That's a huge contrast to here.
Massive difference too in Australia, where we're just at 35 basis points. So there's a couple of big differences between Australia's economy and New Zealand's, and one of the main ones is the unemployment rate. So in New Zealand, at the end of last year, the unemployment rate was already at 3.2%, whereas in Australia at the end of last year it was at 4.2%. So we were a whole percent higher at the end of December. The other factor as well is our economies are slightly different. So the unemployment rate's the big one. The other big one's inflation. So at the moment in New Zealand, inflation's at 7%. We're at 5.1% in Australia. And the Reserve Bank of New Zealand has been a lot more aggressive with hiking interest rates. They started raising rates around the middle of last year and have been raising them very consistently. But now they've just had this new inflation figure at 7%. So they're expected to lift rates today by 50 basis points, which would bring the cash rate in New Zealand to 2%. So they are a long way ahead of us. We are going to be slowly catching up to the RBNZ over the next sort of 12 months, I'd say, Laura.
OK, but we're not going to do that here, are we? A 2% jump?
Look, the next cash rate rise in Australia will be in June, which is just in a couple of weeks, and it's likely to be 25 basis points. So that would bring the cash rate in Australia to 0.6%. So I don't think the Reserve Bank's going to be as aggressive as the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. So we're going to see gradual increases in Australia. The RBNZ is lifting heavily today because of this giant inflation figure that they need to deal with. They need to get inflation down, just like we need to get it down here.
OK, we did see, last week that we've been talking about the talk of inflation and where it's all headed in and of itself having that downward drive. Is there any kind of indicators we've seen between interest rate decisions that is actually effective?
Look, we haven't really seen inflation falling yet. I mean, as New Zealand, as an example, inflation was near 6% at the end of last year, and they've been lifting the cash rate substantially since then, and it's now at 7%. So Reserve Bank of New Zealand's been lifting the cash rate sharply, and it's going to get up to, well, it's at 1.5% right now. It's going to get up to 2%, but probably by the end of today. And we haven't actually seen inflation start to come down in New Zealand, and that's a pretty good indicator for Australia as well. So our Reserve Bank's lifting the cash rate, and so far it hasn't really had any impact on inflation. I think they're going to need to lift it a lot more to start pushing down those inflationary pressures, because their expectation from the Reserve Bank of Australia is that inflation isn't actually going to start falling until next year. It's going to peak at about 6% headline inflation at the end of this year and slowly start to fall in mid-2023. OK, Ed.
What about technology stocks? They dropped on Wall Street overnight. The local market was looking like it would get a little bit of a bump. Did it?
It did. Look, it's up a little bit in early trade, up about 0.3%. The tech stocks in America had a pretty tough night of trading. The Nasdaq was down more than 2%. It was all due to the social media company Snapchat, which put out a profit update basically saying business conditions are really tough at the moment. We're stopping hiring people and we're not going to get as much revenue as we did in the previous half year. So Snapchat's shares slumped 30%. That pulled down all the technology stocks in America, including Google. Our tech stocks are lower today as well. So the rest of the market, though, is looking reasonably good. So the ASX 200 is up about 0.3% in early trade. So it's up very slightly this morning, Laura.
OK, more positivity from you tomorrow, please, Ed. Looking forward to it.
Hopefully.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.